an eyewitness account, for I was there, of Lady Guinevere, known to be the sweetest sight, the loveliest voice, the gentlest character, and also beholden under the greatest wisdom of any maid or damsel that lived in those days. It is no wonder that the great heroes, Arthur, Lancelot, who honestly were so manful, so accomplished of deeds, so wit of tongue, and strong of arms, handsome, gainful form. They truly did, at that time, have their pick of nearly any woman, or man, or beast, or any person or being, fairy or otherwise, found their way through those realms. It is no wonder that they sought Guinevere the most. But Guinevere, before meeting either of them, her heart had already been smitten with a love like no other. And I will tell you this tale. Before I do, I must warn you that we live in a time now, a wide world around us, where unspeakable atrocities occur. But the times before Arthur became king were far darker. To tell this story, I will have to make reference to some very horrible things. You still wish to hear the story. So it was that a great darkness and villainy beset the land. So horrible and war-stricken was the times, farmers could hardly farm during the day without wild beasts attacking them. Those few that there were who had not been slain in war to even lift a plow or a shovel. Often, when land was being tilled for the first time, the bones or corpses of the slain would be exhumed. It was a dark time with little learning and much hardship, much vulgarity and villainy, masquerading as being worthwhile. Goodly princess, my lord, my sovereign, and damsel fair, I am Taliesin the bard, performing the bardic arts. I, at my 4:30 show, like to always tell a King Arthur tale, for I witnessed these things myself, and you can trust it to be true. But I will need your consent before going further, because this is a story of Guinevere's first love, and it does make reference to some very terrifying, horrible things.
Okay, heard.
Is that all right?
That's all right with me.
I will continue. Now there were few lights in that dark time, but shining brightest of all was a group of knights, beholden unto a certain code, a code of conduct that when followed led not only to triumph, but sowed the seeds of freedom, liberty, equality, community, humanity, great glory across the land. These were known as the Knights of Chivalry. And there was a time that a few of these knights found upon the twilight of the rising sun a city in shambles for having recently been sacked by plunderers. And in this flaming, smoldering wreckage, they found a young girl being set upon most cruelly by 3 grown men. Next to them lay a young boy who seemed as though he had been beaten to death. She screamed and struggled wildly, and they bewailed that they had not arrived sooner, for surely this sight they were looking at had been going on for quite some time. Well, they set upon those villainous men, and they slew them in that instant with no mercy. They lifted this child to her feet. She did not need their help. She swatted their hands away. But realizing their good intents, did not see them as enemies, per se. She looked to the young boy, and they realized that he was, in fact, alive. They found out that she was his brother, and he had received those blows trying to defend her. His name was Guinevere, and her name was Guinevere. She demanded to be given the sword of one of these knights, and she would not be refused. Captivated by the intensity, the fire in her eyes, of rage, of vengeance, they handed her a blade and watched as she began stabbing the corpses of the men who had beset her, over and over, stabbing their bodies ragged while shrieking in hatred, vengeful anger. They would never forget that sound for the rest of their days. They took her to a kingdom which Merlin had established, where children would have the opportunity to learn trades, to make a life in peace and relative prosperity and safety from the horrors of that age. But young Guinevere was not satisfied to be a craftsperson or a farmer. She sought to learn the skills of warfare, of violence. And although this was incredibly illegal at the time, for Merlin was given a lot of allowances by the kings of that age for his many triumphs, for his many quests, for his many deeds, and for the fear that they held for him as a conjurer. But still, for a woman to practice anything other than domestic trades was considered a horrible crime. But Merlin, seeing the passion of this child, he said to the Knights of Chivalry that she would grow to become one of the greatest heroes of the land, and that she was to be trained with all due skill. He spent much time training her himself. And as she grew to the age of 18, she became capable of overthrowing any man in combat. Whether with sword or with arm, with spear, on horseback or on foot, she became one of the most powerful warriors that ever the land had known. For she had a narrowness of focus and drew ever on a passion that gave her strength. You know what that passion was?
No, tell us.
It was her hatred.
Yes!
Her hatred of men. Not all men, but all men who would oppress women.
Real!
Her hatred for all the men who had used their power and their strength to oppress young women, full-grown women, old women, women in so many ways, held down, mistreated and abused. So ever she called upon her righteous vengeance against this evil, to strike down any who would perpetrate it. She changed her name from Guinevere, because it means pretty one, to Britomart Bedry Dance. Now her brother always trained with her, and he always felt guilty that he could not protect her on that day. So he was like her shield, and she was like a sword, ever ready to strike at the throats of misogynist patriarchs. She wore armor made by Merlin, that well disguised her form as a maiden. And her brother went with her as a squire, and she went questing as a knight, gaining renown as the Silent Knight, for she would never speak lest people hear her feminine voice and realize that she was actually a woman. Now, as her squire, Guinevere always explained, "My goodly lord, the Silent Knight, his tongue has been cut out, and so he cannot speak, and his face, in that same torture, was horribly disfigured, and so he prefers not to show it before all those he saves." Now many maidens fell in love with this Silent Knight, for he would come in like lightning, strike down their oppressors, and justice would herald in like thunder. But it was not until the Knights of Chivalry were called by Merlin to aid King Leodegrance, one of the few kings who was by chance put in the throne, though being a chivalrous and kindly sort, champion for the people. Because he was chivalrous, the villainous knights of that time would not serve him, and he had few to defend him from the Saxons that would often invade from the nearby sea. So Merlin called upon, in his great time of need, the Knights of Chivalry to defend his keep. And it was then that Britomart Bedrident, wearing her armor, so none could see her identity, did see that resplendent, brilliant, shimmering, shining, glorious form, Guinevere, daughter of King Leodegrance, and she felt within her a different sort of feeling than she had ever felt. She did not understand what it was. A strange, pleasant, yet singeing pain in her heart, which began to rush as though she was in the midst of battle. A racing of her blood through her body, surging to her head and making her feel dizzy. She almost swooned. And Guinevere did indeed notice this night. She did not know why she was so transfixed. They fought for Leodegrance's cause, and indeed did save his kingdom from being sacked. And afterwards, watching as Guinevere tended to the wounds of the wounded, for she was a skillful physician, perhaps among the most skillful at that time, Britomart asked Merlin in private, "What is this vexing sensation that I feel in the presence of this princess?" To which Merlin, a wise and knowing wizard, did explain, "Goodly Britomart, I'm glad this day has come. So warlike have you ever been, I wondered if it would. That feeling that you feel is called love. And it is twice as dangerous as hatred, but infinitely more powerful. And it will vex you forevermore if you do not investigate it. And the only way you can find the answer to this riddle and untie this knot that has you so encumbered is to stay here and spend more time around this fair maiden." And so he arranged, for Merlin had spies everywhere. I'm sure you've heard the saying. In Camelot, the women spread their thighs. Well, everyone spreads their thighs. That's how it goes. In Camelot, everyone spreads their thighs, and Merlin spreads his spies. Merlin had spies everywhere, even underground, but that's a story for another time. And among them was one who was able to arrange for Britomart, without her disguise, without her armor, as merely a maiden, to receive a job in the castle working in the gardens outside of Guinevere's keep. And so it was that she worked in these gardens, which she had very little skill of, but she had spent all of her life training how to end life, not at all how to cultivate it and care for it. And Guinevere quite quickly took a liking to Britomart. They would talk for hours upon hours. Britomart, after all, could speak of all of her travels and quests across the land, and Guinevere, being a wise maiden in fact, she had many things to say herself, though she had seldom left the castle. There was a night when the other gardener had been absent. He had been sick. And so Britomart had to work in the castle all the day long. Deep into the night she worked, and she was covered in dirt at the end of it and grime. She decided to bathe in the fountain therein, in the courtyard. She did not think Guinevere, following an intuition that late in the night, would come to her window side and see her naked form. Guinevere looked upon the body of Britomart, as womanly as it was ripped with muscles. An amazing medley of strength and femininity. She watched, she ran her hands across her curves, bathing in moonlight in the water of that gentle fountain. She watched with such a dizzy head, such a flurry of blood having rushed through her whole body, and she watched as the unbeknownst Britomart washed and left, and she continued to watch for many minutes after she had gone, and then she fell heavily into her bed, the room spinning around her, her body absolutely dizzy. Delight, pleasure she had never known, she was smitten. And she slept not a single night, not a single wink that night. Now, there was a treaty at those times, left by the former High King, that none of his vassal kings who ruled in his stead may make war upon each other until his heir was declared. But, because he did not want his warlike people to lose their strength, he allowed a provision that they could challenge each other to contests of strength, to jousts, either with themselves as the warriors, or with champions that they would choose. And they might wager great treasures, such as land, or gold, or even. And so it was that the villainous King Uriens of North Wales made challenge unto Leodegrance that he could not refuse, offering a fourth of his kingdom in exchange for the hand of Princess Guinevere. He arrived with his entire retinue in pavilions, making challenge for the next day. He did this knowing that the Knights of Chivalry would otherwise come to aid Leodegrance, expecting that he would have no strength of warriors to defend himself. Uriens himself was a brute of a man. He was strong and he was a villain. He was known for laying hands upon women, many of them young, all of them unable to defend themselves. The thought of him doing so to Guinevere was unconscionable to all of the people of Leodegrance's kingdom, but most of all to Britomart. And so it was, when that joust was set to begin, Guinevere was in despair. King Uriens himself took to the battlefield, chiding King Leodegrance that he had not the strength to fight against him, and daring him to send any challenger he might, knowing he had none in his retinue with strength to compare. And Guinevere was also stricken with incredible grief, stuttering as I just did, laying in her bed, staring at her room, believing it would be the last time she would get to look upon it. She was excessively dismayed that her good friend Britomart, who often stayed with her in her chamber talking all through the night, was not there to comfort her this time of terror and grief. She did not know where she was. She did not know why she was not there. And then one of her handmaids grabbed her by the arm and said, "Come, Guinevere, come quick and see! A hero from the Knights of Chivalry have come! The Silent Knight himself is here to fight for your cause!" So Guinevere, still dazed, came running to watch, and she saw that yes, indeed, the Silent Knight in a tilt with King Leodegrance. They did make passes against each other, and in a single strike did lay Leodegrance over his horse's crupper and to the ground where he laid, swooning of the blow, dizzy and unable to stand. And though it was risky to speak, she tried in her most husky voice, could not resist the chance to say. And King Uriens did not know if it was a dream of fever. She leaned over her horse down this pathetic man and said, "One and done. Why am I not surprised?" Now, Britomart Bedredan thought. Now, Guinevere, all of them had things going on. I will tell you in the correct order, though. Guinevere, she had wondered where Britomart had been. And she wanted to thank the Silent Knight, but the Silent Knight had scampered away. Soon after, Britomart found herself by her side, and she told her, overwhelmed, fluttering like a butterfly in her heart, of the brave knight that had fought for her cause. She even used the term, "my hero." In that moment, Britomart Bedredan began to understand why Merlin said that love is twice as dangerous as hatred. Because while she felt it so sweet, she had been the one to save her beloved Guinevere, whom she had become so dearly enchanted by their time together. It was wistful, the joy stricken with much sorrow, that Guinevere believed it was a man who had saved her. And she feared that if she learned the truth, she would feel betrayed, and their affection would turn to hatred. So she said nothing of her partners, felt that heavy whist, trying to lean into the joy, but being ever pulled towards the sadness. King Uriens, then, upon recovering, insisted that the battle was fought unfairly, for he, the king, fought against a mere champion of the other king, and so he said that he would challenge again, offering again a quarter of his land. A double or nothing stakes, as the saying is said. But Leodegrance had received an owl with a message from Merlin, a suggestion which he, in its wisdom, did follow. He replied to Uriens that he need not bet another fourth of his kingdom, but rather, if he would agree to the wager, upon the terms that he could have the fourth of his kingdom that he had just lost, and keep all of his other land and holdings, and offer instead that should any issue a challenge for the hand of Guinevere in the future, they would first have to defeat Uriens or his champions to defend the princess, and should he fail in any of those challenges, he would have to give a third of his kingdom. Now, it seemed a good deal to Uriens, who seemed to have nothing to lose. He also knew that his warrior was mighty, believed his warrior unstoppable, even against the hero who had just thrown him to the ground. So it was again. The battlefield became home to a fearsome joust. Again, Britomart was not to be found at the side of Guinevere. And Guinevere, remembering the muscles that she had seen on Britomart, countless other hints in her wisdom, intuitions that had lingered, senses she had sensed, that Britomart Bedredan was more than a mere gardener, peasant maid. She began to wonder if perhaps, was she? Could it be? And so the Silent Knight, amidst all that wondering, did take to the battlefield again in her honor. The Knight of Uriens was a beast of a man, a giant, an ogre, a mountain, covered in layers of armor thick as your thumb. And through many battlefields had he soaked his skill in increasing bloodshed. Truly, Britomart Bedredan had never faced so mighty of a warrior. As they clashed again and again in the tilt, they broke lance upon lance against each other. To splinters their lances broke, pounding dents in their armor, knocking blows into their chests, but they were not dehorsed. Again and again, spear after spear, until eventually it was Britomart who was wrested from her horse. This knight, seizing the opportunity, then came around again and bared down upon her with great speed, pointing the lance at her while she stood upon the ground. But she had been trained by Merlin, who was skillful and ingenious of many tricks. How a person, seemingly of disadvantage, might twist that disadvantage to their advantage. And so it was that she performed a maneuver of great skill and planted the lance of this jouster into the ground, causing him to be thrown off the back of his horse. But he too was skillful, and while she sought to set upon him, he was already on his feet, and they slashed at each other with blades, hacked at each other, and much blood did pour from between their armor. They fought for hours, and all who watched stood aghast. Britomart called upon her greatest strength. Do you remember what that was? It was her hatred. And stronger in this time than ever, her hatred for these men like King Oriens who would use violence to steal a young woman away from her loving family, away from her home, to use her like a slave, to beat her, to treat her worse than livestock all the rest of her days, merely because they claimed that men were by God also a man, given such sovereign rights. This rage had always allowed her to prevail in battle, and calling upon its greatest strength, yet she did in fact drive this knight back, push back upon the prey. But for the first time ever, she was not able to gain victory, and he began to push against and to drive her back. She had never experienced this, and she experienced what every warrior fears on the battlefield. Her nerves did break. She began to fear. In this weakness, this giant of a knight seized the chance and struck her a doleful blow, stabbing into her side. Though she had trained much, through great hardship to never do so, the combination of her nerves being broken and this doleful blow being struck, Britomart let out a shriek. Fortunately, there was only one who recognized that it was the voice of a woman. Guinevere, recognizing the voice of her friend Britomart, in that moment realizing that yes, in fact, her suspicions were true. This was her champion. She was filled with such passion, such overwhelming joy and love. She was dizzier than the night she watched Britomart in the fountain. And though her head was spinning, she was filled with such delight. She was also filled with great fear that she might be witnessing the last moments of her love. And so she did what she knew was the best and only thing that she could do. She shouted forth, "My hero! I love you!" Through all the noise of the throng and the clamor of the battle, her voice did pierce straight to the heart of Britomart. "I love you, my hero! Survive, my hero, even if thou lose, and I will love thee always." And it was then that Britomart realized why Merlin had said that love is twice as dangerous as hatred, infinitely more powerful. For it was not hatred that now welled in her heart, but love, a power, triumphantly pushing through all of her fatigue, through all of her burning wounds. She felt light. Overwhelming vigor coursed through her body, and she rose up and drove back this knight, and struck upon him so many blows that he was slashed and gashed and hacked upon his form, blood pouring out from every side of his armor. He could not even lift his sword. He begged for mercy, and Britomart won. Now Guinevere, she rushed with great excitement, giggling as she did, to come to the side of Britomart Bedridance. But Britomart Bedridance, she knew that Guinevere, being a physician, would recognize the wounds on her body. She had one to love, the one who she loved most. She did not want it to be ruined by the truth. She believed that if Guinevere realized that she was not her man, she would feel betrayed, and that love would turn to hatred. And so she fled quickly with her brother, and left that kingdom. All that Guinevere could see was the back of her armor disappearing in the distance. It was not for over a year they were reunited. And by then, Guinevere was already lovingly enwrapped in a throuple with Lancelot, King Arthur, an open throuple, might I add. Many others came and went from, and came and came and came again. But always with the sweetest spot in her heart before her first. When they met again, yes, the bed did break. And the noise was heard across the kingdom. And all were jealous of the nights they spent between Guinevere and her first love, Sarah, later to be known as Queen Britomart Bedridance. There you have a tale.